All right, do we have rising terrorism in the country? And most importantly, where's it coming from? Well, let's talk about it. Wajahat Ali joins us he's a senior fellow at the Western State Center. Waj, welcome to the program.
Hey, Cenk, how's it going, man? Two Muslim men with multi-syllabic names, but I'm gonna go with the monosyllable Waj to match your Cenk today.
Okay, sounds good. All right, so has terrorism increased in America, and where's it coming from?
Yeah, the number one domestic terror threat in America, Cenk, is white supremacist terrorism. It's been this case for the past few years, but surprisingly, we haven't heard about it. And we're not talking about War on Terror, the sequel, Terror Harder, because the culprits of this terrorism represent, unfortunately, I hate to say this, but this is the reality according to all the data and facts, right-wing circles, an increasingly incestuous group of right-wing ecosystems that are motivated by conspiracy theories that see the rest of us, especially you and me, Cenk, people of color, black folks, women, and LGBTQ as invaders who are trying to replace and weaken quote unquote Western civilization, which is code word for white people.
Of course. Okay, let's talk about the degree to which it's happened. I mean, I see in your piece, or in a different piece, I should say, 3 times as many domestic terrorism investigations as 5 years ago. So that is a lot of extra terrorism. And it appears that they have a number of different categories. And I was amused by one of them, which is animal rights and environmental terrorism. Now, why would I be amused by any terrorism? Because I think that that's like leftover stuff from a different era. It's apparently less than 1% of the cases. Well, as I was reading that, I had the sense that they kept that category, even though there's almost nothing in it, just to be able to say, both sides do it.
Yeah, I mean, well, it's not just that, but it's 2009, Daryl Johnson of the DHS, he published a report where he warned about the rise in right-wing terrorism. Now, again, this is 2009, Cenk. That report was quashed internally. He had to go become a kind of a whistleblower. Spencer Ackerman, when he was at Wired, did a piece with him. Daryl Johnson later wrote a book. And he said there was political pressure from Republicans in particular because they realized that research, which warned, again, about the rise of domestic terrorism, the rise of right-wing terrorism, made them and their movement look bad. So all these alleged patriots, right, who fight for national security and care about the war on terror, and there were such hawks when it comes to black folks and brown folks and poor folks, when it comes to their own team of many, let's just be honest about it, white conservatives who are committing these acts, they kept quiet, they quashed it. We also saw that the DHS under Donald Trump, according to a whistleblower, was told that they're going to downplay the threat of white supremacist terrorism, the number one domestic terror threat in America, and upplay Antifa and BLM. So again, what we're seeing is this incestuous system, right? It's not outliers, Cenk. And what people need to realize is that this is part and parcel of the modern conservative movement. If you don't believe me and you think I'm just being partisan here, I give you the January 6th violent insurrection. A violent coup attempt, thankfully it was failed, that resulted in the deaths of 5 people. And the Republican National Committee, Cenk, I always want to remind people this, called those violent insurrectionists ordinary citizens engaged in a legitimate discourse. So when you have the affirmation of a violent insurrection from the GOP and the RNC itself, and then you have the repetition of violent conspiracy theories, which our own FBI is saying, listen, QAnon has the power of radicalizing individuals. Deep state conspiracy theory has the power of radicalizing individuals. When the number 3 leader of the Republican Party, Elise Stefanik, is promoting deep state conspiracy theories, no wonder they're looking out for their own team. And unfortunately, there are extremists and terrorists on that right-wing team right now.
Yes, Waj, I know you go on mainstream media a lot. You don't have to convince anybody in this audience. We already do the facts, and we're not scared of the right wing like everyone in corporate media is. And so, yes, it's overwhelmingly right wingers. Overwhelmingly. I'm not talking about bias. I'm not talking about perspective. I'm talking about facts. The facts are that almost, well, let's put it this way: the great majority, at least 80% of the domestic terrorism in this country, according to the FBI, comes from right-wing extremists. So it's absolutely clear. And by the way, it's not, so Trump wanted to emphasize Antifa and BLM as you're talking about, but it was Obama who was scared in 2009 and afraid that Rush Limbaugh on Fox News had criticized them. So he backed away from a report prepared under George W. Bush. So they keep, being afraid to call it what it is. In fact, Waj, let's talk about the National Defense Authorization Act. It just passed, well over $800 billion. Yet we haven't been attacked from outside the country since arguably 9/11, right? So that's now been 21 years, right? But we have right-wing terrorists attacking us and killing citizens in acts of terrorism pretty much nonstop. So do we have a sense of proportionality as to the threats here? Shouldn't we be spending $800 billion to counter right-wing extremists and not on defense, which just goes to Lockheed Martin executives' salaries?
Look, dark humor here. It's good to be a white terrorist. I mean, can you imagine if you and me, Cenk? I mean, if you and me just decided to take a bunch of our brown and black friends with Muslimly sounding names and go to the US Capitol and just protest, right? And speak in Turkish and Arabic, no weapons. About 5,000 of us, suppose we just did that peacefully. There would be chalk lines. I can't even imagine a bunch of black and brown folks doing January 6th. And God forbid if that ever happened, like I said, there would be war and terror to terror harder. I mean, they would crack down. They already did this in the post-war and terror climate. People forget that there was a Muslim registry called NSEERS. Thousands of innocent immigrants were deported. There was surveillance against Muslim communities. Those who not just were Muslim, Cenk, but Muslimi, including Sikh Americans, got killed by white supremacists, right? So our communities were the focus of like unrelenting pressure, and we've really felt the boot of law enforcement and DOJ on our necks. But right now, as you know, just tonight, TPM, Talking Points Memo, released thousands of texts that they gathered from Mark Meadows, and there were elected officials who were Republicans who were part and parcel of these violent insurrectionists who were asking, Mark Meadows to pretty much go along with the coup. We also saw Ginny Thomas, the wife of Clarence Thomas, a sitting Supreme Court justice who still to this day believes in the big lie and tried to use her pressure and influence to promote a coup. And yet nothing has happened to them. No accountability, no prosecution. So there is a double standard and there is a lack of proportionality due to whiteness. And also, I'm glad you mentioned it, every single institution, including Democrats historically, has bent the knee to bad faith right-wing pressure. And the question is, why does the majority tolerate the terrorism from the right wing? Why do we allow ourselves to be victimized by these people? And the last thing I'll say, in the past few months, you've seen the rise in stochastic terrorism, Cenk. And stochastic terrorism is when the right wing in particular uses mass media to target certain individuals and groups that results in random but statistically probable acts of violence. Poll workers, elected officials, doctors, hospitals, educators, all people and LGBTQ community, all people and groups who have been targeted by Tucker Carlson and the right wing, and we sit there and allow ourselves to get terrorized. Why?
Yes, and look, it just arguably happened again. Today we covered the story of Marjorie Taylor Greene saying that if me and Steve Bannon had planned January 6th, we would have come armed. That's a cue to her audience and her followers. Now remember, the next time you confront Democratic politicians and politicians you don't agree with, make sure you have a weapon with you. That's just, and Matt Gaetz has talked about your Second Amendment rights in regards to politicians that they don't agree with. Madison Cawthorn has done the same. They're constantly agitating and instigating violence, very much on purpose. And by the way, I mean, as one of our viewers pointed out, it was almost like a O.J. Simpson-like speech. Now, if I had planned January 6th, okay, except certainly Steve Bannon did, and Marjorie Taylor Greene did partially. But to your point about January 6th, by the way, there was the very first thing we said on TYT. If they were Black Lives Matter protesters, it would have been a massacre. And if it was Muslim protesters that stormed the Capitol and were chanting, "Hang Mike Pence," where's Nancy Pelosi? We're gonna hang her and kill her, right? I don't know that anyone in the crowd would have survived. I think they might have killed them all. And
yeah, we would have had dead bodies, man. There would have been. I mean, we need dark humor for dark times. I said there'd just be lots of chalk lines. You and me would be a chalk line. And let's not forget, Marjorie Taylor Greene said at that gala, it was not just some rinky-dink place. This was the part and parcel of the GOP. This was a gala with Marjorie Taylor Greene and people from VDARE one of these extremist right-wing white nationalist sites. He was there, the founder was there. Jack Posobiec, I don't know if I pronounced his name correctly, I don't care. One of the leading conspiracy theorists, he was there. She said we would have been armed. Well, guess what? They were armed, Cenk. They were armed. They were armed with flagpoles. Some people had guns. Some people brought pepper spray and nooses with the intention of hanging and assassinating both Nancy Pelosi and Mike Pence. And the fact that to this day that they're still seen as ordinary citizens, and some Republicans call them, heroes, and Paul Gosar calls Ashley Babbitt a violent extremist who was radicalized by QAnon, by the way, the same violent conspiracy theorist that now Trump promotes on Truth Social. She's now seen as a hero as well. What we're dealing with is a radicalized and weaponized movement. And again, I realize when people hear me or you, they might say, oh, it's these lefties or these people who are progressive. But I've tried to just point out a very sober case here using their own words, taking them literally and seriously. When they're literally telling you their plot, and they're telling you that they want to kill you and attack you and overthrow this democracy, a flawed democracy, but democracy nonetheless, then do we not call that terrorism? And since we have a history of attacking brown people and black people for war on terror and tough on crime, why do these criminals who are openly doing a coup, an ongoing coup, get away scot-free?
Yeah, now the last part of the double standard is, you mentioned after 9/11, tons of Muslim individuals and groups were surveilled, including mosques, including Muslims at a university. My nephews were going to Rutgers. We found out later that Giuliani had gone outside of his jurisdiction to spy in on Muslims going to Rutgers, so et cetera, right? So they get a standard of, I do anything you want to them. Who cares about their goddamn civil rights, right? And who cares that we don't have any evidence that they've done anything wrong, right? Just enter their houses of worship and do all this surveillance. Now, on the other hand, we have overwhelming evidence that there's right-wing extremism, and it has tripled recently, right? And when we say, hey, can you investigate not on their right-wing ideology, but the fact that these guys are saying, yeah, I can't wait to grab my gun and kill somebody, we often, I guess what I'm asking about, Waj, is the gaslighting. So the FBI seems to be tracking it down. Do they have the same, do they also have a double standard? Yes, it's much harder to investigate a white right-wing extremist than a Muslim or someone on the left, et cetera, right? But it seems to me that corporate media is one of the biggest culprits, that they just are super reluctant to call white right-wing extremism what it is.
Look, I've been calling this movement a fascist movement, and finally, just a couple of months ago, Joe Biden and Democrats came around and called it semi-fascist. And once he called it semi-fascist, he got the feedback that the base and the majority said, yes, thank you for calling it for what it is. And then he gave that robust defense of democracy speech where he called them out more. I think he could still go further. You saw with Donald Trump, Cenk, that this man was a living, breathing racist. He behaved like a racist. He palled around with racists. He promoted racist talking points. Did they call him a racist? No, they said racial trip-ups, right? Racial flare-ups. Despite having a history of racism. So Donald Trump being a racist isn't a racist. A white nationalist isn't a white nationalist, right? New York Times just a couple of days ago did that analysis piece where we're still trying to figure out Elon Musk's politics. And Elon Musk is like, hey, let me just tweet out my politics, my white nationalist politics. And they're like, I wonder whether or not he's racist. So this reluctance of corporate media and all of our corporate institutions to call out an active radicalized threat is part and parcel of the problem. We have to name it if you want to truly confront it. And words also matter. Trust me, those of us who got called and still get called terrorists just for being brown skinned, we know how words matter. But this is where words really do fit the definition of what these people are doing right now. It's a radicalized, weaponized movement that is committed to terror, stochastic terrorism, and actual terrorism that took place on January 6th. They're going after our poll workers, our doctors, our educators, elected officials. And you mentioned Paul Pelosi, the husband of Nancy Pelosi, and the person who tried to kill him was radicalized by conspiracy theory. And I just want to say this, back in the day with you and me, Cenk, we're old enough, our daddies and our granddaddies Republican Party, they would have lowered the temperature. Modern GOP, they followed up that conspiracy that radicalized them with another homophobic conspiracy. This is what we're dealing with.
100%. It's actually super obvious once you get past the veil of corporate media that softens everything the right wing does and amplifies anything that's slightly off about the left wing. I think the corporate media is one of the biggest problems in driving this incredible double standard because I don't want to offend my right-wing viewers, I might lose ratings. Whereas, hey, there aren't that many Muslims in the country. We could kick their ass all day long and we're not gonna lose any ratings. In fact, we'll gain ratings. So that's just the reality of it. All right, Wajahat Ali writing at the Daily Beast and is a senior fellow at the Western State Center. Thank you for joining us, we appreciate it.